So welcome to Bad Recipes number 2. This one's about Sunday worship versus the Sabbath. Now, I can tell you I've written several scripts for this already, and each one I have to toss away because the arguments and the amount of information behind Sunday worship is overwhelming. So I'm just going to talk about the bottom line. Now, the first Sabbath is found in Genesis chapter 2. He blesses the seventh day. He makes it holy. You see it again when the Jews are being laid out the law from God. The Sabbath is instituted as Jewish law. In the New Testament, Jesus declares himself the Lord of the Sabbath. And that means he's, saying this is a pretty big deal. Now, in the Bible, in the New Testament, the Sabbath is actually endorsed over and over again, yet somehow Christians have come away believing that Sunday worship is what is testified to in at least Paul's writings. And I want to kind of explain why that is. First and foremost, we're looking backwards in time, and we're seeing pretty much what we want to see when we look at Paul's writings. There are mentions of collections on the first day of the week. There are mentions about not to be judged on the Sabbath or how you do it. But these mentions are not declarations to change the Sabbath. What they are misunderstandings on our behalf. For example, collections on the first day of a week makes a lot of sense when you consider Paul was living under a lunar calendar. Paul's custom was to be in the synagogues on Shabbat, witnessing about Jesus Christ. Where do you think Paul's followers were? I pretty much bet they're going to be in the synagogues, listening to Paul witness about Jesus Christ. I'm also pretty sure the Jews weren't overly enthusiastic with Christians coming in and invading their Jewish synagogues. Therefore, I have no doubt that they did not want to do collections within the synagogue. So when are they going to do them? The very next day. Now, for us, we think of Sunday as Sunday morning, the dawn, even though it starts at midnight on the solar calendar. But for a Jew, a Pharisee, such as Luke and Paul, actually, I don't know if Luke was a Pharisee. I don't think he was. He was just following Paul. At any rate, for Paul, Sunday starts at sunset Saturday. That's when Shabbat ends. So a lot of these things we read and we get confused on is because we don't really understand the culture that Paul was coming from. Now, it's true, he said, don't let anybody judge you on the days and the festivals and all that. But he wasn't saying to move those days. He was saying don't let people judge the way you're celebrating or not celebrating them. But here comes the crutch, the problem, okay? Christians in particular like to hold the Ten Commandments in high regard, but they ignore the Sabbath that was ordained by the Father, the Sabbath that was declared by the Son that he was the Lord over it. And while man was not made for the Sabbath, Sabbath was made for man. When we refuse to worship on the Sabbath, for whatever reason, we're actually refusing his blessing, his declaration that this is the holy day. A lot of people think that we can just pick the day and we're free in Christ to do so. But I would remind you that that's a risky endeavor. Now, I'm not saying we can't worship any day and every day, including Sunday and Saturday. What I am saying is to ignore the Sabbath is to turn our backs on a blessing. This isn't a salvation question, because salvation doesn't rest on whether or not you keep the Sabbath. Salvation rests on faith in Christ. However, we have to be aware of what we're doing when we refuse a blessing like the Sabbath. The further we go from the roots of Christ, the further we get from Christ. Now, when you find out that Sunday worship was instituted in the 2nd century, it started. Okay, first of all, there were Gentiles that wanted to separate from the Jewish Christian communities. They were anti-Semitic, and they wanted to do things their way. So they did start celebrating on Sunday, and they did use the resurrection as the reason for that. The problem with that is the reason that Jesus rose on the first day was because he was observing the Sabbath. He cannot possibly rise on the Sabbath. He doesn't break Torah. That's why he rose on Sunday. So they're keeping the Lord's Day. They're celebrating his resurrection. That's their business. But then Constantine in the 4th century AD, the Roman emperor, came along and he instituted a legal Sunday-only worship decree. That didn't just affect Christians and Jews, but for all citizens, their day of worship was now to be Sunday, no matter who they worshipped. And this made sense because Constantine was, after all, a lukewarm convert to Christianity who worshipped Mithra, the sun god. So he kind of had this mix and mash with the son of God and the sun god. And we could go into that for days, but it's really not worth it. The point is, he switched it, and that was kind of his motive. To back him up, about 40 years later, the Catholic Church, probably still having issues with Christians trying to celebrate Shabbat, which is Sabbath, they declared that any Sabbath observant would cast you out from Christ. And, of course, that was how the church worked back then. If you weren't down with the church, you couldn't be down with Christ. I tend to believe that's how it was in the 1st century, but it was dramatically different in terms of what the church looked like. You know, you read in, John's epistles that, they knew who was with them in accordance to how they stayed with them, stayed with the teachings. And the church adapted that, but the teachings had become corrupted. It seemed the further that we got away from Christ in years, the further we got away from him in theology. So when we're looking at Sabbath today, 21st century, it seems to me it's one of those messes that we should try to clean up. We should be celebrating the holy day the same day that the one we follow celebrated the holy day, and his apostles celebrated. People say, I don't know what I'm talking about, but the apostles in the book of Acts, they declared, what Christians should follow. And one of the things they said was the law of Moses is going to be read every Shabbat to them in the synagogues, where they assumed that's where the followers of Christ were going to be. So at any rate, this is my retake of Bad Recipes, episode 2. It's minus all the cute slides and all the references, but we could go into the biblical references in the comments if you'd like, but really I just had to get that off my chest. It's such a big topic, and it's so stupid. God made one day holy, a day for rest, a gift. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. We are supposed to be following him, and yet here we are on Sunday. We've missed the mark, my friends. Missed it altogether. Well, if you've liked this video and you want to see more, just subscribe, share, like, comment. Let me know you care. Well, until next time, shalom. God bless you. Peace out.